Hello and welcome to day 5 of, what did I say, week 2, day 5 of the spring 2026 programming with C Sharp course. I'm Jim Kaufman with Rankin Technical College. So as far as today, what I want to go over, yesterday I already mentioned as far as grading, it will be a little bit, especially the newer students. I try to get some. Sometimes depends on what's kind of going on. I've gotten to them on Mondays and Tuesdays, but and especially I'm kind of teaching another course too, so it'd probably be like the end of day Wednesday. I should have everything kind of graded. It could go later than that some weeks, and other weeks I might get done earlier than that. But just kind of want, because I know when you're new, you kind of want to know what kind of grade you got on things. So I apologize if it takes a little longer than what you would like it to. And I already mentioned about the holiday next Monday, no lecture on that day. So here's the list of assignments that I've kind of gone over a little bit. We're gonna go over some Chapter 4 lab stuff. The written test, pretty much, you're on your own with that. I'm not going to be going, do like I did on Chapter 2 one, where I kind of basically we went through the whole thing. But you have those labs. You have those not labs. You have those guides, those different guides. Which, if you look in the syllabus, it's on the syllabus. And I think I did add them to your the videos for like day 1, day 2 videos. So you can go look in there in the description section. It has links to those as well. And then also you have the chapter 3. You should have the chapter 3 PDF, and that's on the main page and inside Rankin. But chapter 4 I know, but actually I'm going to be giving you vouchers. So you'll be getting vouchers today to be able to use for your book, and we'll be using an app called Vital Source. Okay. So let's kind of look at that. Actually, before that, I want to mention one thing about the hands-on test here. So I was just kind of looking a little bit at the repositories earlier today, and I just kind of want to mention something. So, like with the hands-on test, real quick here, it talks about creating a solution name hands-on test. So, hands-on test, chapter 3. So, a solution is not necessarily a folder name, right? It can be a folder, it can also be a folder name, but a solution is going to create a solutions file, right? Just like what we did in the lab, like what we did that lab assignment, right? And with a hands-on test, I need to be a little more stricter on grading. You're really supposed to follow these things pretty much exactly. So if you're gonna have 3 separate projects, it needs to be called EX1. It can't be called something else. Okay, EX2, EX3. All right. And kind of the reason for that is when you start working in a job somewhere, usually you're going to get a list of requirements, there's times you can be creative to a certain extent, but for the most part, you need to follow what the requirements ask you to do. And so in this case, the labs, I'm a little bit more flexible and lenient on the labs. But for the hands-on test, if it says create a solution, name this, create a solution, name this, right? If it says create a project, name this, create a project, name that, okay? So please try to follow that. And just, real quick, we did the same thing here on our very first lab, right? For our labs chapter 2. So here's the folder name, but like I said, the folder name isn't necessarily a solution name, even though we call this solution, right? The solution is right here, right? It's got the SLNX file, right? So that's the solution file. And then each lab, would be, instead of lab 1, lab 2, it's going to be EX uppercase 1, EX uppercase, EX uppercase 2, right, etc. for the hands-on test. So, all right. So the next thing I want to do is go through Vital Source just to show you that a little bit. So I'm going to send everybody, there's a couple people in class, and so I'm going to give them the code they need so they can bring it up. But I will send each person, it's a distinct code. So I'll be sending each person a code for access to this, and I'm going to go ahead and go through VitalSource a little bit. Okay, in class I had a couple students, and so we had some issues with the codes in VitalSource. So what I will go ahead and do is I'll have to get that resolved, and once I do, I'll go ahead and just do a separate video on using this VitalSource. You know, all the options that are available and how to use it. Okay, so we'll just continue on to other things for right now. Okay, so chapter 4 is about how to work with numeric and string data. So what we'll be doing, declare and initialize variables and constants, code arithmetic expressions and assignment statements, use the static methods of the math class, generate a random number, cast and convert data from one type to another, use the correct scope for your variables, declare and use enumerations, and work with nullable value and reference type, and null collating operators, and null forgiving operator. All right, so I'm going to make sure we can distinguish between a variable and a constant and give the naming conventions for each. Describe any of these data types: int, double, decimal, bool for boolean, and string. Describe these terms: literal value, null value, empty string, concatenate, append, escape sequence, lots of stuff here. I'm not going to just keep on reading through all this, but quite a mouthful, right? So these are different keywords, C# keywords for built-in value types. You have byte, S byte, short, U short, all the way through. What you'll probably, use a lot of, you're going to use integers a lot, right? You'll use integers, doubles, decimal, float, okay? Be using those a lot. So for kind of best practices, using camel notations for variable names, start the name with a lowercase letter. Capitalize the first letter of each word after that first word. So here's counter, all lowercase. So here you're doing, you're declaring a variable. You declare a variable. Here you initialize this with a value, right? You can all do this all in one line, or you can do it in separate lines, right? So how to declare and initialize a variable in one statement. So basically this is what I just mentioned. Number of bytes, this is called a long. This is like just a very long number. We'll go into that in a little more detail here in the future. Long, a float. So a float has a decimal place, and you designate a float by putting an F here. So it could, you get multiple decimal places for a float. A double, so it's double for a price here. A decimal for a total, right? M for money, right? M for money, decimal. Population here. This is actually another way that you can do it with these underscores as well. Double, star count, yeah. Well, you're probably not going to define things like this too much, but obviously this would happen a lot. These doubles. We'll work with some floats here and there. Decimal. Char will be something Boolean, okay? And here it's just showing that you can go ahead and initialize two variables on the same line by doing int. Like here you're doing int x equals 0 and then comma y. So this is implicitly, so this is assuming that this is also an int. By you doing it like this, this is saying, okay, this is also an int as well. So Pascal notation for naming constants, capitalize the first letter of each word. So here's how to declare and initialize a constant by using capital D. Now I know I mentioned it yesterday, and I know some of our labs use kind of all uppercase letters. Either way, that is kind of fine. I think things have changed within time, and that's having it all uppercase is kind of like a little bit old school. And the reason for that was more because there used to not be keywords like const, right? You would just have, you know, before there was const, you would just have int like this, and it was a good way using all uppercase like that with the underscores to separate. You could look at it and say, okay, yeah, this is an integer. I mean, this is a constant. I know this is a constant, right? But since the const keyword came along, then, you know, kind of doing a little bit differently. I'm fine with whatever, but I think, you know, for the most part, best practices, this is what's suggested, okay? Different arithmetic operators that we all know. I will point out a couple, and we'll talk about modulus if you haven't done, you know, haven't done much math in a while. But, you know, obviously addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, modulus, we'll talk about that in a little more detail because, you know, that's something that you may not be as familiar with. Obviously, I don't know why it's doing the same thing there again, but that's okay. Plus plus and minus minus, well, that's called what's called increment and decrement. So you can increment a variable by having that variable, and we'll look at that. By just doing plus plus, it'll add one to it. If you do minus minus, it'll subtract one from it. So here's some examples of that. You've got x equals 14, y equals 8, and here you're adding something together. Here you're subtracting it, multiplying it, dividing it. So modulus, right? And then you're using x modulus. This is all about remainders. We'll look at that in detail. Here's basically a negative number plus a positive number, right? Here you're taking the result 7 and y is 7. Let's see, result 7 equals 7, y equals 7. Okay. And here you're doing, so this is showing a pre thing. So what this is kind of showing is actually until you, when you do it originally, it's going to, this is doing a pre increment, right? There's a pre and a post. You could have the minus minus after this or plus or this after this. And it's handled a little differently. We'll look into that, how that's different. Arithmetic expressions. All right. To tell you the truth, a lot of this, I'm not so thrilled about these slides, to be honest with you. I'd rather just go ahead and go into the guide. I think the guide's much more helpful from my perspective. Okay, so here is the Chapter 4 guide, which is the Chapter 4, you know, this correlates with the Chapter 4 in the book. So this guide number 4, how to work with numeric and string data. So variables and constants are used to store data in your application, right? It's understanding the difference between them is fundamental in programming. So a variable stores data that can change as the program executes. So you use camel case naming. So there you go, like we already mentioned. And obviously, then a constant stores data that does not change, right? And then this is using the Pascal case. So camel case is always the first letter is lowercase, and then all subsequent letters of, you know, basically when you're describing a name or something, all subsequent ones will be uppercase, right? Whereas with a constant, you start out with a uppercase, which is also called Pascal case. So declaring variables, declared and initialized in one statement. So here you're declaring it. Your declaration is int quantity, and you're also initializing it to value 10. Same here, decimal. So a decimal you kind of want to use especially for numbers. For monetary, you want to use the M. Here's a string now, name string, John. Always remember with a string, you have to have your quotes. Okay, you have to have your quotes when you use what's called a string literal, right? When you're just putting a value in there. Okay. Now, sometimes you're setting this to something that returns a string, that's different. But when you're just using what's called a string literal, basically you're just putting the name of the string in there, whatever it is, right? You need to use that in quotes. Bool, that's Boolean, is valid equals true. So this is just setting this by default equals true. Then maybe later on in your program, you may do some function, and if it returns something, you say we're going to change that value to is valid equals false, right? A lot of times for a lot of programs, is valid being false from the beginning is, that's kind of I want to say preferred, but often used is you set something to false in the beginning, and then you do things in your code to, you check things in your code to see if that needs to change to true, right? But this is basically declaring and initializing variables in one statement. Here is a example of you declaring it first and then initializing it later, just like we looked in that PowerPoint presentation that I'm not too happy with. Declaring constants. So basically here, you're obviously the most important thing is make sure you use the const keyword before the data type, right? So these are all data types. Decimal, int, and string is your data types. And constants start with the preferred way nowadays is to use Pascal case, right? Start with uppercase, and then every subsequent word would also be uppercase. And in a lot of cases, you want to use the M. Okay. And just to reiterate, make sure, when, like I say, a string literal, it's basically you're just giving it a value, right? When you're just giving something a value, you need to make sure you use the quotes. Common data types. So integers for whole numbers, right? No decimals. Something where you always know number of students in the class, right? If there's 7 students in the class, it's all, it's gonna be 7. There could be 8 or 10, right? But it's never gonna be a half student, right? So whole numbers, right? Obviously, there's not gonna be negative students, right? Okay, floating point numbers, okay? Floating point numbers are less precise, okay? 3.14, right? Pi, that's just the shorter version of pi, minus 0.5, right? A floating point number. And that's a double, right? Decimal is high precision number, best for money, okay? You try to use doubles and stuff, and there's probably going to see some code and probably even some assignments that will use double. Usually, a lot of times you get away with it, but if you do it enough and you do some really more advanced type things, sooner or later you're going to run into rounding errors. And obviously, if you work at a bank, you don't want to be using doubles at a bank or any kind of a financial application, because a lot of times everything will be fine until you do some certain thing and all of a sudden it doesn't work right. Right? So decimal is much more high precision, and so it's best for money. Boolean, it's either a true or false value. And then obviously a string is a sequence of characters. And so if you're going to initialize a string and you don't know what a value is, you can obviously initialize it to empty string, which is just 2 double quotes, right? So best practice, use decimal for monetary values, right? Never use double for money, just like we were mentioning. Value types versus reference types, okay? So value type stores actual data directly, defined by a structure. Example, int, double, decimal, boolean, okay? Reference types. And what this is all about is you've got numbers that are kind of considered primitives that are stored. So they're kind of called value types, right? So like an integer, a double, a decimal, boolean. And what we're talking about, how it's stored, it's in memory, right? Um, so it'll take a while for you to kind of grasp that a little bit, maybe. But you look at your code, you say, okay, well, I'm defining my code. I don't understand what you mean, right? Well, it's actually how it's stored in memory, because everything you do on a computer, everything's stored in memory on that computer, okay? And it's just where is it stored, okay? So when you define an integer in that, right, and when you build it, right, when you build it, it's actually stored in memory. And so value types like int, double, decimal, boolean, right? They're stored as value, whereas these other things are stored as a reference to a point, your value. So let's just say an integer, right? An integer is going the whatever. Let me use this example. This tax rate, okay? This tax rate is going to be is a value type, and it's going to have the value of this in memory, okay? But the string is going to be a little different. This is going to be basically, it's going to be in a different place in memory. The company name is going to be one place, and it's going to point. It's going to point to a different place in memory that has a string is actually an object. Okay, a string is different than a number. One the numeric kinds. All these other ones. Okay, a string is a little different. And so a string will actually point, so this will be in one place in memory, and this will be in another place in memory, where this will point to this, okay? Don't worry if that's a little confusing, okay? We'll learn that here in the future. So, so reference type, it stores a reference, a pointer to data in memory defined by a class, examples like a string, arrays, we'll do arrays eventually, and objects, okay? Literal value, a literal value and special values. Literal value is a value that is coded directly in your source code. So just like I was saying, this was a literal string earlier, right? For a string, this is also a literal value as well, okay? This is a literal value as well. So all of these are literal value. There's an integer literal, a double, etc. Boolean literals, either true or false. Them are your only options. When you say bool, you only have two options, right? It's either going to be true or false. And this is common type, ways to be kind of using it. If something's active, is something complete, is valid. A lot of times starting out with is very, very popular, is active, is complete, is valid, etc. Okay. Special string values, null value. So null value represents no value or nothing. So in a string, you can say that a string name equals null. Okay. You can't do that for an integer. Okay. You can't do that for an integer. But the reason you can use null is because actually kind of strings are objects, right? An object can be null. It can be null. So strings are kind of a special type, right? Because they're actually considered objects. But a string, you can also give it just an empty string as well, right? String literals. So here's just showing you a path. Okay. String prefix with that. This is called verbatim string. And to be honest with you, I haven't really used this. But it's common, I guess. Raw string literal, C#, later versions were actually part of what we're using in our class when we brought in Visual Studio. It's using C#14, I believe, and I will check that. But under the hood, right? It's kind of all bundled together when you download it, the Visual Studio 2026, all that's kind of bundled together. I'm almost sure that we are using it because I think it's required for that. Well, we are using the .NET version of 10, .NET 10. I think .NET 10 uses C# 14 version. So I know that can be kind of confusing, you know, because the versions of the programming languages are different than like the .NET versions. So just to kind of mention that. So this is just showing a different kind of literal. Yeah, so starting with C# 11 plus, you use this like this when you've got things that are more complex on multiple lines. Well, and another thing is you've got the problem here is you've got a quote, right? You have a quote like this in the data that you're wanting to assign to that variable. You've already got these, and without using that extra quote on here, right? If you don't use it like this will cause an error. If you just put a quote before the curly brace and after the curly brace, it's going to be a problem because it's going to try to end the line at the next quote, right? And in the editor, you'll actually see an error. It'll red squiggly. So the way to do these ones for this is use the triple quote like that, right? Also, you can use what's called escape sequences in your code for like new line, okay? And remember, it's always going to be a backslash, not a forward slash. A backslash ends for a new line. And that's helpful when you're wanting to do something where, you know, and especially when we're doing forms and stuff like that, if you want a new line somewhere and, you know, or you're wanting to space out different things, you know, you can use the backslash n for a new line. Here is for doing a tab. Okay, so you can tab. Here's for a backslash, right? Because sometimes you have to watch certain things are kind of like special characters, right? That can cause some problems in your code. And for doing just for doing this one backslash, what you have to do is you have to actually, you have to do a double backslash for that just to be one there, okay? And we'll get into that. You'll see that in the future here. A double quote, okay? Yeah. So you have to, for a double quote here, when you're doing some things in your code, you have to do it like this, okay? And we'll look at that. All right. Arithmetic operators. So binary operators work with two operands. So you got addition. So there's your left operand. There's your right one. All right. 5 plus 3 is 8. Subtraction. You know, there's all kind of basic stuff here. All right. Multiplication, division, and modulus. So basically, I'll just mention this, and you know we'll talk about this again, you know, a few times just to get this, just in case, you know, maybe you haven't done math in a while, and you know you need a little refresher on some of this stuff. So modulus is basically the remainder, right? So basically 17 modulus 5 goes into 17 what? 3 times, right? So 3 times 5 is 15. Well, what's left over? A 2, okay? And this is helpful. Modulus can be helpful in certain things, like you want to do something like, you know, you've got a whole bunch of lines. You know, maybe you got 100 lines that you're displaying in a form, right? A Windows form, and you want every other line to be a different color, right? So modulus is a good way to do something like that. There's all other reasons to do that as well, but you know, basically you do. You know, you could do a modulus on a multiple rows, and if every, you know, it could be a variable, right? A variable, and if it's every other row is, you know, equal to a 0, then you know that that's the second row. And we'll get into that in the future. I don't want to confuse you too much on it, but it's a very helpful thing for that. So. You know, and then you have a variable that, you know, is the number of lines, and you're incrementing, you're going through those lines, and if, you know, if the modulus returns a 0, you know that's a 2, right? If you had modulus 2. So let's just say 18 modulus 2, right? 8 goes in there 9 times 0 remainder. So you know that's an even row, and maybe you want that colored background color to be a yellow or something. We'll look at that in the future. Unary operators work with one operand. The increment and decrement operators are not binary operators. Okay, so it's a different kind of operators. Okay, you've got the binary operators. These are the binary. Basically your addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and the modulus one is binary operators. Unary operators work with one operand, right? So here you've got an integer x equals 5, and you want to increment this by one more, okay? So maybe it's something you're looping through something, and you want to increment it by one more. Now, by doing this, now x, after you get done with this, x is going to equal 5, right? Here, okay, well, yeah, so once you do this, x is going to be 6 when you get done with this, right? Then you come to the next line. So at this line, when you get down here, it's already 6 because you already incremented. Now you're decrementing it. So you're subtracting 1 from it, and now it's back to 5 again. Okay. Prefix and postfix. So this is important. And this is something we'll review again. So here you're basically got a variable, you call an A. Obviously, when you define your variables, I know in a lot of examples it's kind of an easy thing, but you want to call it something that's you want to use a descriptive name for your variables, right? This is not the best to use here, but that's okay. So A equals 5, B equals, and here you're incrementing first and then you're assigning, right? So you increment this, all right? So A equals 6 and B equals 6, okay? You increment first, then assign. Here, okay, you're taking the same thing, and so in this case, C is equal to 6, but A is equal to 7. So you assign first, then you increment. So you're assigning this variable, equal to, then you're incrementing it. Okay? So you assign first before you increment. So one more time on this, because I know it's a little confusing. So you increment first. So basically B, right? B's no value at all, right? So what you're going to do is you got 5. You're going to increment it. You're going to increment A. So A is now equal to 6. And then you're going to assign it to B, right? You increment it first. Then you assign it to B. Here, right? You're going to assign the value of A, which is already 6 because you incremented it to 6 here. So B is already 6. So, you incremented it. So here you're assigning it first, and so you assign it to 6. Then after that, you are incrementing it to 7. I know it's a little confusing. Don't worry, we'll review that in the future again. So here's some compound assignment operators. So here's int total equals 100. Here is total plus or equals 50. So what this is this is the same thing as doing, and I can't, let me just do this in a separate little video. So right here, let me bring that back up. So here you got int total, same thing as that line right there, right? Equals 100. The next line, total plus or equals 50, is the same thing as taking your total, which is 100, plus 50, and then assigning it back to this value. Okay? This is kind of a shortcut. You can just do total plus equals 50, and now the total will equal 150, the same as this. So it's just kind of a shortcut. Okay? So it's called a compound assignment operator. So basically, and then you can also do it where you can do the same thing. So basically you're saying, take the total, which is 100, add 50, and assign that back to total. Here you're going to take your total, right? So now it's 100. So now you got totals already 150. So take your total, which is 150, subtract 25, and put that value back in total. So now it will be 125. All right. Same thing for multiplication. So we've got, we're at 125 now, right? We're at 125 now because every time we do this, it's going to change the value of total. So we're at 125 now. So take 125, multiply it by 2, and put that value back into total. And the same thing here for division is basically what are we at now? We're at 250. So take 250, right? Divide that by 5, okay, which is 50, and put that value back in total. So order of precedence when an expression has multiple operators. So C# evaluates them in a specific order. So whenever you have parentheses in you have a multiple compound equation where you got multiple things going on. Wherever you have parentheses, they're going to be evaluated first, right? Then after that, the next thing is going to be increment and decrement. Okay. Then is going to be multiplication, division, and modulus. Okay, and then going to be addition and subtraction. Okay. So most of the time, though, in a regular math class, they're going to talk about this one. They're basically not going to probably talk about increment and decrement, right? Because this is kind of more programming related, right? And then here's multiplication, division, and modulus, and then the last thing is addition and subtraction, right? So here, basically you've got 5 plus 3 times 2. So the first thing you're going to do is multiply 3 times 2, right? Because of order of precedence, multiplication happens first. 3 times 2 is 6, plus your 5 equals 11. So with parentheses, right, addition happens first because you got parentheses. You don't do this multiplication first. You do what's in parentheses first. So 5 plus 3 is 8. 8 times 2 is 16. Okay, integer division. So when you divide by 2 integers, the result is also an integer, right? The decimal point is truncated, okay? So here you've got 4 and 8. You're taking 4 and dividing it by 8, okay? You divide 4 by 8, that's going to be less than 1, right? So it's going to be a half, right? So when you do something like this, you're going to actually get a value of 0 because you got both integers, right? You have both integers. It's going to truncate because you need a whole number, right? And it doesn't round up. It just truncates it, right? So any decimal place is going to be truncated. So it's going to be 0.5, right? 0.5, it's going to truncate the 0.5, and what you're going to be left with is just the 0. So to get decimal result, you cast at least one operand. So what you can do here, right, is here you're what's called casting. You're converting this integer to a decimal, okay? And when you do this, when you convert this to a decimal before dividing by an integer, right, then you will get the decimal place. Okay? And it's just showing this all. You could cast both sides, both of them. All right? So, but just remember, by itself, it doesn't matter what you set it to. This ain't gonna, just because this is a decimal, right, that accepts and has decimal places, right? It's not going to give you a decimal because both of these are integers, which is only going to return a whole number, right? All right. Common mistake, dividing by 2 integers always gives an integer result, even if you assign it to a decimal variable. So you must cast before the division occurs, if that's what you're looking for, right? If you're the math class. So C# and other language as well. Actually all languages. I shouldn't say all. most languages all have a math class. It's kind of provided, right, just to do um, certain mathematical functions. Um, so math is called provides static methods, and what that means is that you can't see, and we haven't gotten there yet. But in C sharp, you can if something isn't defined as static, you can override it. You can take a class you could be using a different class from some other object, and if this isn't static, you can override it and you can create your own version of it. You can do that. Well, in math, you don't want to override. You don't want to override methods because they serve a certain function, right? And you don't want to override something because then all of a sudden you get some results that you're really not wanting, right? Because math is exact, right? This is how it works. You don't want to override it. So kind of understand what that means by it being a static method, right? So then here's your object. So your object dot round, right? You don't have to create an instance of it, right? They're just static methods. Okay, so here's your object name, which is called a math object, and then you do a dot round. It's a static one, so it rounds to the nearest integer. So math.round 12.7m is going to give you a 13. Obviously, if it's lower than that, it's going to round it down, right? Math.pow raises to a power, right? 2, 3. When you do this, it's going to be 2 times 2 times 2 3 times. 2 times 2 is 4. 4 times 2 is 8. Okay. Math square, just basically a square root. Square root of 16 is 4. Absolute value. So it's going to, if you have a absolute, if you're going to turn any kind of a negative number into a positive number, right? Math max, large of two numbers. You pass in two numbers, and it'll return the largest number. Math min, smaller of two values. Math min 5, 8. It's going to return 5. Okay, generating random numbers. So C sharp, like a lot of languages, have what's called a random class, a random object, right? That you can create. So you're creating a new random object here. Okay, this is the class. The class is the random class. By you doing this, you're instantiating a new object. Okay, and you're assigning this new object to number, right? So this is going to get all the properties, methods, everything that's part of whatever the random object has, okay? And it has a lot of things, okay? We'll look into that in more detail, how that kind of works. But so this isn't something you just create it yourself, right? This is already a existing existing class that's part of the C sharp framework, part of the programming language, okay? And it has a bunch of methods and properties. And so when you do this, you now have, just by you doing new.random, you're instantiating a random object, right? And you're assigning that to a number. Now that you have that, you can do things on it, right? So here you're generating a random integer from 1 to 10, okay? Inclusive, right? Note upper bound is exclusive. So yeah, it's just how this kind of works. And we'll look at this in some code, okay? But this is how you basically do it. And so you got number, right? And then you do dot next, right? So this isn't something you've created, this dot next. This is part of the random class, right? And now that you've got an instance of that class, you have an instance of that class by instantiating that class, right? You can perform certain methods. Dot next is a method that's in that class. And so this is what you do. This is going to create a random number, all right? And that's just generate random double. Oh yeah. So this is just showing you a different thing. So this is a random number between 1 and 10, all right? So this will be, you don't know what it's going to be. It's going to be any number between 1 and 10, all right? Whereas this here is basically, it's not telling you, this is going to generate a random number from 0, to less than 1.0, okay? So this is just kind of by default. This is how this one works. So same thing. You got your instantiated object called number. Then you're running this method. That's as part of the random class on that on this object, right? And you're getting a random double between 0, and 1.0. So remember that next.min-max method's upper bound is exclusive. To get numbers 1 through 10, you use 11. Okay? To tell you the truth, I'm not quite sure. Well, a lot of things are very, that wouldn't explain that. I'm not actually 100% sure on that. Actually, I probably need to look that up, why that's exactly like that. But that's how it is. Working with strings. So string concatenation, okay? So you can use the plus operator to concatenate, join strings together, okay? And this was, in a lot of different programming languages. And if you if you're working in some company somewhere, you start looking at some older code, you'll probably see a lot more of this going on. Newer code, there's newer ways to do it. But this is how you can concatenate a string together, right? The plus sign is not an addition, right? When you're doing that with a string, right? When you're doing a plus sign with a string, it's not adding anything, right? It's what's called concatenation. So it's taking first name and it's concatenating last name to it with a space, right? So that way you've got a space in between John and Doe, right? Appending to an existing string. Okay, so basically here you've got a string, a variable called city state that you assigned it Milwaukee, right? Which is a literal string, right? Whenever you assign a value just straight forward, just like these are also literal values. Just kind of as a review, literal value, string literal. Okay, and then here you can say city state plus or equals, comma. So this is very similar to what we've seen with the plus or equals for addition and subtraction, etc. Right? But this will work for strings as well. Okay, but this is basically going to say, take city and city state, which is Milwaukee. Okay, add what's here and put that value back into city state. Okay. So here is a string interpolation. Okay, this is more modern way to do some things instead of having used to take Alice. You had Alice is something years old. You would take Alice, hello. You take all of this, and then in this middle, you'd have to end the quote. Here, I'm not going to show you, but you'd have to actually, put a quote, and then you'd have to end the quote. Then you put a plus sign. You put the variable. Put another plus sign. Then put another quote. So it kind of was a mess. This is the easiest way. This is a more modern approach using a $sign, right? And then here is your quote. Make sure you got your begin quote and your end quote. Then any variables that you have, you put them in curly braces. So there's name and there's age. So this is the preferred way to do things in most cases. Okay. It's simpler. It's straightforward. Okay. Type conversion. So you got implicit and explicit casting. So implicit casting, automatically conversion from a less precise to a more precise. Okay. So an integer, right, is less precise, right? Integers, going to be, number 5, 6, 7, whatever, right? A double is going to be 5 dot, might be 5.3 3, right? You got a decimal place. It's more precise, right? All right, you got decimal places. It's more precise. So when it's more precise, you can create a variable of type double and assign it to an integer like that. This is okay to do that. Okay, this is okay to do that. Now here, over here, explicit casting, you have manual conversion from more precise to less precise. Okay, and it says potential data loss here. So let's look at this. So here you got a double, a variable of D, you assign it 9.7. All right. So here you do integer I, you're creating a new variable called I, and you're setting that to D. Now, if you don't include this, it's going to complain. Okay. You can't implicitly casting, right? If you get rid of this part right here and just left it int I equals D, the editor is going to let you know you can't do that. It's not going to build either, okay? Because you can't go from something more precise to less precise, right? Unless you tell it, I'm okay with this. This is what you're doing here is you're saying, you know what? I'm okay. I know I'm going to lose precision. I'm okay with it, right? So you explicitly, it's kind of a fail-safe thing. By you doing it, you're omitting, right? You're saying, hey, I'm okay with losing precision. Go ahead and cast this from something that's more precise to less precise. So in this case, your value of I is equal to 9. Conversion method comparisons, right? So convert between two numeric types. That's just what it's just showing you. When you convert this, there's no such operator in that. Don't want to confuse that. It's just showing you. So when you do this, you're going to get this, right? ToString, convert any type to string, right? So 42.ToString is going to take that number and convert that to a string. Okay. Parse will convert a string to numeric and throws an error if invalid. Okay. So we did some little parsing. There's different ways to do this. Things have obviously in these languages, multiple ways to do a lot of things, but here you can actually take like you're an integer or a double and parse it, right? And so if here you're passing in, you're doing a literal, right? You're just passing in a value here. This is going to work fine because it knows that this is going to be kind of a normal. This looks like a number. I know what to do with this, so I can parse this into the number 42, right? But if you pass in a word, it's going to throw an error, right? Same thing with kind of stuff we were doing with our console apps and that same thing. You did a read line to read the data in, and if the user in the console end up putting a word instead of a number, right, and you tried to parse that, you're going to get a failure. There's ways to prevent that, right? So try parse will safely convert string to numeric. We're going to look at an example here very shortly on doing that. So it's going to safely convert a string to numeric and returns a Boolean. So when you do this, okay, what you're doing is you want to try to parse this, okay, and you're creating a variable called x, which never like a variable like that. You should be using a descriptive one, but they use x, y's, and single letters for a lot of demonstration examples. But here, you're saying, I want to try to parse this. So I want to try to parse this to an integer. As you know, that's going to work, right? So what's going to happen then, okay, it's going to assign the value of the output, right? This is just this isn't a name you give it. This is a part of the try parse method here, right? But this is a name you give it. You give this whatever name you want, okay? So change x to my number, right? You need to leave out there though. So, but what this will do, obviously it'll work, and it's going to assign this to this variable, and so that you'll have access to this variable after this executes. Okay, we're going to look at that. We're going to have an example of this here shortly. But what this is actually doing, what this returns, right? So we've kind of talked about this a little bit, and we're going to talk about this more. So methods, whenever you have a method, a coding method, C# method, it's going to either return void, which is nothing, right? It's going to return void. You have to define that. It depends on how it's defined. It's going to either return a void or it's going to return something else, right? It can return a string. It can return an integer, a double, all kinds of different types. It can return a object, right? So there's multiple things it can return, or void, right? Another one it can return is also a Boolean, okay? And in this case, this method is a method that's part of the C# programming language, and this method returns a Boolean, either true or false. All right. So when you run this, okay, it will go ahead, since this was able to convert this, right? This will return a true. So you could actually set this. You could create a variable, say bool space is valid equals this whole line, and then in this case it would turn true. And so is valid would equal true. Okay. If you did that and set it to, if you send in a word here, it ain't gonna know what to do with that. It's gonna say I can't parse this, and it's gonna return false. Okay. But in this case, right? In this case, it's going to return false. It's not going to blow up, right? You just do this. You try to do this, and you send in a word. This is going to blow up, okay? So this is a way to make sure that your application is user-friendly. You don't want your application blowing up for users that don't know anything about programming. They're using your application, and they do something, and all of a sudden they get some big error on the screen. They don't know what that means, and they're not going to be happy, and they're not going to come back and use your application again, right? So this is a way to kind of prevent an error, right? And then you can kind of control things a little more. Convert class, it converts to between two various types. Okay, using a convert. So here you're converting to an int, and you're converting from a string to an int. It's common use too. All right, toString converts to a string with formatting. So here you've got a total, all right, a decimal, right? You're giving it M for money, right? And then you're creating a variable called amount and that's a string. And then we do a total.toString, passing in C for currency, and it will format it with a $sign and commas and decimal places, right? Parse, string to number, throws an exception if it's invalid. In this case, it will be fine. And here's the one we were just looking at, a little more in depth. So here you do an if statement, which we haven't talked about that too much. I know the students who were in the last class, last semester, they worked with if and else. And, don't feel bad if you're new and you haven't worked with them. The advantage is going to be for you is, you're going to learn now, and then actually when you do the other course, like that some of the other students already did, the HTML course, the HTML JavaScript course, you're already going to know it, so it's going to be easier for you. So, it's a little bit harder now and then easier next semester, right? So here is an if statement. And this if statement, for an if statement, we're gonna talk about this more in the future, but just for now, an if statement, whatever you have in there, always has to evaluate. You use the term evaluate. It has to return a Boolean, a true or false. Okay, it has to return a true or false. So try parse actually returns a true or false. It's a method. like we're talking about up here, right, returns a Boolean, right? These other ones don't. They just return a value. They return, you know, an integer, right? Or they return, like this one's going to return an integer. And if it fails, then it's going to throw an error. This one will kind of does two different things, right? This is going to actually return a, you know, it's going to return, it's going to try to parse it, okay? And if it can parse it, it's going to assign that to a variable, right? And it will return true, right? If it cannot parse it, right? If it cannot parse it, then it's going to return false, right? So if true, so if this evaluates to true, then you're going to go ahead and do all this stuff, all right? Now, what you're going to kind of see here, this might look a little familiar. If, you know, we did a little bit of WinForm stuff. So this is basically kind of, this is a text field in WinForms, right? This is a text box, text field in WinForms, right? And this is what we'll be doing, right? So, and you just kind of remember that a text box in on a form, all that stuff is always going to be a string, right? So everything on those forms are always, you know, I don't want to say everything, but, you know, for the most part, everything's going to be a string, and it's going to pass. That's what it's going to pass back when you click something, when you do something, when you're reading something. There are going to be strings, right? And so what you can do is, like, if this is a text box, which enter a number between 1 and 10, right? If that's what your text input is, then, you know, they're going to enter a number between 1 and 10. Then this is going to come back. If they entered 2, this is going to come back as true. If they entered a word, right, it's going to try to parse that. It isn't. It's going to come back false, and it's never going to execute this line, okay? And we'll look at that more here in a little bit. Convert class methods. So here you're basically, you know, converting to an int 32 and to decimal. We'll talk about this more in the future. All right. Okay, I want to kind of start getting into the, I was going to do this first one in the labs, chapter 4 labs, do this first one for you here. And so I think there's not a lot left in here, and I'm just, we can get through this probably without this at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and move into doing the lab assignment in Visual Studio Code, or Visual Studio 2026, sorry. Visual Studio Code's a different product. I have to get that one out of my mind. All right. Let me see what I got here. All right. Let me bring up Visual Studio here. All right, you know, just kind of a reminder, sometimes it's great to have all these things. As time goes on, you'll have a lot more. If, you know, you don't necessarily want things like this, you want to clean this up, that, you know, it will get extensive as you move along here. And you can always just remove, this doesn't delete anything, it just removes them from the list, right? Just remove them from history here, right? Let me check out my directory structure real quick to make sure I don't already have something in here, because I want to put in the same directory as you guys are using. All right. Apologize here. Give me a second. I'm going to create a new project. And what I suggest here for these labs, so I know before we created one solution, multiple projects within that solution. You know, then were some small little apps. The WinForm stuff is a little more complicated stuff. I would always do everything as a separate, every lab has its own solution, right? And do everything separately for multiple reasons. One is just clutter and having a lot too much stuff going on in Visual Studio. Another is if you're making some progress, you have them all in the Visual Studio, and you got them part of a solution, and you mess with one of the there's different config files that you really don't play with too much, but you end up messing something up, and then all of a sudden nothing's working. So I suggest you kind of do each one separately. Okay, so I'm gonna do so each one's a individual project will have its own individual solution. Okay. So here I'm going to create a new project, and then here I'm going to go to WinForms, and remember we're going to use this first one here. Okay, we're not using the .NET framework. This is an older version, and we're not creating a library. You got these other WinForms things. We're not doing control libraries or anything like that. So we just want this first one here without the .NET framework thing in parentheses there. Okay, I'm going to hit next here. My project name, I'm going to call this Lab 1. And we're just going to place a solution to project same directory, right? We're just going to let that just like that. Okay, we're going to hit next here. And then obviously .NET 10, hit create. Okay. Now we come in here. So whenever okay. So obviously come in here, and it all depends what you kind of did last, or how this is going to be set up. So obviously if you don't have your toolbar here, right, or you might not have your properties window here, right, you need to come up here to view, and then come down to toolbox down here to get your toolbox, come up to view. Properties window, go down there. So here's your toolbox. I don't know kind of what happened there, to be honest with you. Okay, so I was having some challenges with my with the Visual Studio here, so kind of a good thing. So kind of wanted to kind of go through things. Sometimes things can kind of get messed up here. And obviously, a lot of times you might have to come up here and do view to get things. So I got this window over here and different things are going on with that. And I actually had this a little messed up over here. So one thing you can do if you have problems, okay, this is a kind of a separate issue. This isn't docked, right? It's not docked where it needs, and this is like a free floating one. So I'll show you how to fix that. But also you might have some other issues, and you just kind of like, I just want to get back to what I was doing before or something, kind of a reset thing. So you can come up here and go window.reset window layout, okay? Hit yes, and that'll kind of put everything back to some, default, a default setting, right? And then you'd have to kind of go ahead and grab things again. So here I'm going to go ahead and grab my toolbox again, and I'm going to go ahead and click the little, so I want to pin it here, right? I still have a problem with my form designer being here. So the way you can fix this one, like I got this little free float, and if this ever happens to you, you don't know how to fix this, what you can go ahead and do here is you can hold down the control key, okay? And then double click up right here, double click this, and it'll go ahead and dock it, okay? So now this is docked. That's how you dock things, okay? So there we go with that. All right, so let's move forward here. And also I need my properties window, view. I don't know why that did that, but we're gonna might have to fix that as well. View. Well, this is kind of like freaking out right now. Actually, and sometimes you have to restart things. It kind of gets confused, whatever. Sometimes you have to restart Visual Studio. All right. So I was coming up here and hitting this view, and it kept going away. And actually, I think it's how I'm doing it. And to tell you the truth, a lot of my fonts on all this stuff is a lot larger, and that's kind of causing me some problems as well. But I want the properties window as well, so I click on that, right? So I've got that. I got my Solution Explorer toolbox. Okay, got my form opened up here. I can go ahead and close this. Actually, got to close this before you can close that. But okay, so for this assignment, let's look at the lab here. So this is called distance converter, right? Another thing is it's kind of best not to use the default name on the form here. So really, I'd kind of like to call this something descriptive of what I'm doing, because all the time this is just the default name it's going to give to everything, right? So if I go basically over here, go right click and then do rename. Okay, I'm doing this right on this form thing, the form.css file, and I'm going to change this to distance, D-I-S-T-A-N-C-E, converter, and you know, maybe I call this form. That's fine. Help if I spell it right. Distance converter form, and hit enter here. Okay, it's going to ask me if I want to rename all the files, and you probably should choose yes here. It's probably something you actually should do earlier in the process than later in the process. Click yes on that. Okay. So we have all these files here, and I just want to show you the things that really are important to us. Okay. So this is your visual of the form designer, right? This is your visual. You can take and move controls over there, and you know, this is your basically, you know, your form designer, right? So to actually to get to this, if for some reason it's not open, right? If for some reason it's not open, you can right click on here, okay, and then click View Designer. Okay, that's going to show that. Now also there's going to be code. The way that the WinForm stuff is, it's all wired together. Okay, this stuff's all wired together. All these other files that, you know, all wired together. And if you kind of actually go to your directory structure, so you know, all of a sudden, you know, you got all these files. You know, kind of the same for the console app you were doing, but you got all these files now. You know, let's look at all this was created. You know, it creates a lot of things, right? It's all wired together, part of the whole WinForms.net framework, right? So, you know, 31 files. You know, we haven't even really done anything yet, right? We haven't even built it. When you build it, it's going to create more files. So, you know, 14 folders, 31 files, right, already. So, creates a lot of things. There's a lot of things you don't even want to mess with, and you kind of need to leave alone. Probably one of the most important things here, okay, is have you know, your form designer, right? And the other is if you right click on here. So always remember you got the thing that looks like a form here, right? Don't worry about dependencies. You're not going to do anything. Okay. This program.css is just kind of a main program. I mean, I'm not saying you can't open it up. You don't want to change anything in there. Okay. But this is kind of the main entry point for the application. There's in some situations, there's some things you may want to change in here. Okay. But for most part, you know, there's nothing we're going to do anytime soon in here. Okay. So click the X, kind of don't even mess with that for the most part. And like I said, if you expand this, you know, you've got different things here as well. Okay. But the best thing to do is kind of to, you know, not mess with anything in there. And, you know, especially these earlier labs. So, you know, here's your form, whatever you called your form. By default, it's just going to be form1.cs. I changed mine to distance converter form. It's usually kind of best to, you know, add a nice descriptive name to what it is. You don't want to have spaces in here, you know. Basically, you probably want to kind of create it like that, okay? But like I said, so that was that. You can view designer. That's what we're already seeing. Or you can view the code. And so this is the code that's behind that screen. This is where we're going to make edits. So when you're getting one of those text input fields, when you're doing some calculation, all that, it's all going to be done in here. Okay. This is your designer, just to design your form. This is what's behind that form that does everything. You know, this is where all the events kind of happen, right? So for right now, and one thing you kind of want to get in the habit of doing, do a file, save all. Okay. Often, you probably should do that often. All right, so we got that. So first here, I want to go ahead and, so here's my form. If I click on this, right, you're going to see the properties for that form. The text is up here for form 1, right? We want to call this distance converter, right? So there's that. I click out of that. You'll see that has changed. Okay. So we talked about that. We talked about there's kind of two things. The easiest way to get to the designer, you can click on this, but you know, I just don't want to get in a, it's probably best just to keep things organized. You can right click and do view code or view designer, right? So right now we're in designer. So let's go look at our directions here, our lab assignment again. Okay, so we've got a distance in miles, a distance in kilometers. These are labels, right? These are text boxes, right? And these are buttons. And then this here is actually a label too. This is going to be our result label, okay? Our label result, label miles, label kilometers, button, right? So remember for labels, we do LBL, start that. That's what we name it, okay? So let me just go back and do that. All right. Yeah, I better leave this up on my other screen just so I can kind of look at this for myself. All right. So, okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we want to do a label here. I'm going to drag a label over here, right? We can copy this a couple times. How many we need? 3 of them. Copy. So there's that one. There's going to be that one over there, and one more. And that's going to be down here at the bottom, right? So this label here is going to be, so the text right here, right? Text is different than the name, right? So our text we want to be distance in miles. This one we want to be distance in kilometers. Okay. Then in here we're going to call, this is going to be populated. We can, I hate to not give it any value because it'll be too small. This one is one we are going to put our result in, okay? These up here are labels for our input fields, right? But this one down here is going to be for that. So let's just leave that like that for now. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to go ahead and do, well, actually, I probably should label these correctly. Okay, name. So the name, remember the text is what goes in here. The name is the name that we're going to use to refer to this in our code, okay? In this case, this one we probably won't need to do much with, but you know, just out of best practice, we were going to call it we're going to label it the correct way, and we're going to, I mean, give it the, kind of the correct name. So for a label, we do LBL, right? LBL, and then we just, maybe distance. You can abbreviate things, distant in, whatever, in miles. Just something that you know what it is, okay? Distance in miles. And then here we want to do the name for this one. We want to do distance label, LBL. And then distance in kilometers, KIL. Yeah, we'll spell it out. All right. And then here, though, this one is going to be one we're going to actually, when this thing runs, we're going to populate this with data, okay? So this one here, we're going to name this LBL and result. Okay. The next thing we want to do is we want to use a text box now. And we're going to have 2 text boxes, right? You can drag it twice, or you copy and paste, whatever. But then obviously, it helps you kind of line things up, right? And you can change fonts on here and everything else. I'm not going to spend time to do that right now. But you change the font color, etc. Okay. All right. So this is going to be what? These is our text fields, right? So here we want to give these a name. So text box 1, we don't want to leave text box 1 because especially eventually you're going to have a whole bunch of different fields on a thing and you won't know which one's which one. You might drag them around and move things in different things, order and everything else, right? So here, what we want to do for text box, we do TXT, right? And then we'll do, same thing here, distance, distance in miles. Okay, and then here we do same TXT, and we do distance in kilometers. That's kind of a big word, big name, but that's okay. It probably is. I don't know what the limit is, but okay. And so we got that, and we got that one, and then then we also need a couple buttons, right? So we're going to grab a button and drop that over here. Grab another one. And then here, we want convert to kilometers, convert to km. So in here, for our name, well, first might as well do our text first, right? Our text is going to be convert. So you put spaces in here, right? This is just text. This is just what's going to be on that button itself. And we're doing KM there. So I probably should have named everything too. KM instead of kilometers everywhere, but that's all right. All right, and then down here, name. So here we want to do for buttons. We do it's just best practices. You can find things easier, everything else. So button. So here we're going to do convert to, and I might as well use the KM, button convert to KM, right? And then this one here, well, we need to make this a little bigger, right? So we can read it. And then this button here, for the text, convert to miles. Oh, that's fine. All right. And then for our name, I blew by it already. I don't think so. There's our name. For our name, we're going to do button. And we'll just do convert to miles. Okay. And we'll have to make it a little bigger so we can see everything there. Did I mess something up? No, I didn't. It just didn't show it right away. Obviously, you can... I'm not worried. As time goes on, we probably want to do a little better on formatting and stuff. All right. At the beginning, it's not a big deal. Okay. So distance in miles. Distance in kilometers. Here's our convert button. Here's our convert button. Here's our label that we're going to populate later. We'll line that up over here. Right. We can make our screen a little smaller if we want. All right. So, okay. So, file, save as. Save all. Not save as. Save all. And another thing, just a suggestion. It's probably a good idea to, get in a habit. You can, spend some time, check things in often, especially, maybe this is a little too early, but, you start doing something complicated, might as well check something in. Just something goes wrong, and all of a sudden, you click some wrong buttons, you forget to save something, and all of a sudden, oh my God, So check things in often. And then especially when you're really working on something and you get something, really working good, decent, check it in. Even if, you're only partially done, check it in because at least it's working then. You got something goes wrong. At least you've got a working, something working, both for submitting as an assignment and just for your own purposes because, all of a sudden you had something working and then you play with something, now it's broke and you don't have anything checked in at all, right? So better to check in something incomplete than nothing at all. All right, so we have that. So next thing we want to do is we want to do some events, right? So the user is going to enter. Well, we can always see it run here, right? Might as well see it run. Make sure it's good. We didn't do anything wrong. Looks good. Put focus in the first field. Everything looks good there for now. Okay. That's another advantage of just having, one solution, one lab per, keeping it isolated. You only have one here. Remember, we kind of had for the console apps, you had all four of them. You had to pick the right one. You're obviously good. I'm sure a lot of you picked the right, pick the wrong one, or just, you have to make sure you pick everything right. So, another thing that's beneficial there on that. All right, so we got that. So next thing is there's some events, right? So, obviously, what's going to be doing something. It's going to be like convert to kilometers here, right? We have distance miles, convert to kilometers. Okay, so one thing you can do here within Visual Studio, you can double click this. Okay, come up here, double click this with your mouse, right? And I'm kind of wondering, that's all right. Let's see what's going on here. I think it's okay. I'm wondering why it didn't do what I expected it to do. All right, so you've got this. So this is what it's supposed to do. I expected it to create that method. I'm not sure why it wouldn't have created that method. not like something? Was it not happy? That was the convert to kilometers. I don't know. Let me try this other one here. So if I double click this, it's supposed to automatically populate this with thing. For some reason, it's not. Usually it's going to put a method in here for each one of those. Okay, I was having some issues. I don't know why. Sometimes you have to kind of close Visual Studio, open it back up. Maybe some other things I was doing earlier caused a problem. But so basically when you're in Designer and you click on a button, right, it's going to go ahead and within the properties of that button, it's going to add this click event, right? It's going to add your click event. And then if you looked at your code, right, right click view code, it's going to put your button click here, okay? All right, so let's see. The next thing we want to do here is we want to so this is kilometers, the thing. So so we have our, first of all, so we're gonna be kind of like doing an if-else statement here. So we're gonna do that try parse. If you recall in that guide, if you watched the video earlier, we do a try parse. So we're gonna do that. But the other thing is we also have that label result. And so one thing is when we do an if-else statement, let me just do something real quick, okay? So you got if, and I'm just going to put in true here, right? Because this is expecting a Boolean, right? It's expecting either true or false. So I'm going to do that, all right? If true, all right? And you can have an else with it. So if that's true, do that. Else, you want to do something else, right? So else, okay? And I'll use curly braces, right? If else, okay? So if whatever's in here is true, it's going to execute this. Else it's going to do this, okay? So in both cases here, we're probably going to want to, if it's true, and basically if it's true, because what we're going to do is if they entered the right stuff. So what we're doing here is we're going to validate that what they entered on the screen, okay, is valid, right? Is valid. Then we're going to do our computation, right? We're going to do our conversion. Then we're going to update that label that's on that screen, right? So, and then if it doesn't, we're going to update the label on our screen to say, please enter a valid number, okay? So since we're doing this in two different places here, right? For us to have access to that in both places, right? We want to go ahead and create a variable up here for that, okay? Or, well, all we need to do is set it to empty string. We probably should set it to empty string up here. Let's just hold on for right now. So here what we're going to do is we're going to do, and as if you recall here within our guide, maybe I can bring that back up. Within our guide here, we did a try.parse. Try.parse safely convert string to a numeric returns, and it's going to return either a true or false. That's what we want. We want if statement's always looking for a true or false, right? So what we're going to do here on that is we are going to go ahead and do double here. dot try parse. Okay. And then we are going to, we want to get our, we have a text here, and we had different ones. I don't, usually going to have a pop-up, right? Right? It's going to pop up stuff. So what happens is in this file, okay, it knows everything you put on that screen, okay? Because this thing is tied to that screen, right? This is the back, this is what's happening behind the screen. This is all the code that kind of executes that. You know, the Window Forms has a whole bunch of files, everything's wired together. So, but this what we're putting in here is wired with our visual design screen that we're looking at, okay? And so it knows all the different buttons and everything else. That's why it's telling you that here, right? So here's where we want to get our what? Our miles one, right? Distance in miles, right? We want to get our distance in miles, and we're going to convert that to kilometers, right? So we're going to select that one, okay? And that is our field name, but to get the text from that field, what someone enters, and we have to do it like that, okay? Then we're going to do a comma here, and we're going to do that out. Okay, so this is output, and then we'll do a double. And then we're going to create a variable. Okay, we're going to create a variable, which is, you know, it's miles, right? So we'll just go ahead and do miles here. All right. And then here, let's see, what else we need to do here on this. That's it. We're missing a, you always got to watch your parentheses. You got open and close parentheses for this method, right? Try parse is a method. Whenever you call a method, you're going to have an open and close parentheses with everything that it accepts, okay? So that's one, but we have another parentheses on our if statement, right? So we need to end that. So we're going to end that. All right, so we have that. So the next thing we want to do is we want to do our calculation, basically, right? So we're going to do double kilometers equals, so I didn't do a variable here. So I need to do a constant variable here. So basically we're going to do, and up here after this form, okay, let's see here, I just want to make sure I do, after the curly brace, okay, let's do a constant. Okay, that's where our kilometers per mile is. So we'll do a constant. And then we're going to do a double here. And then kilometers per mile, you know, I know that, like I mentioned before, for constant, a lot of, used to kind of do everything uppercase on that. But we'll go ahead and follow kind of what it's expecting. So first one being, I guess, being like this, right? Per mile, right? So that's kilometers per mile equals, and we're going to do 1.6, okay? That's how many kilometers in a mile, okay? So we're defining this up top. This is our constant. Kind of best practice. A lot of times your constant, you kind of define these up top, right? So these are different methods. This kind of initializes our screen, right? This is just kind of an initialized component. We don't, no reason to mess with this, right? We're just going to be messing with our on-click events, right? So we got double.kilometers here. And this is going to be equal to, okay, KM. And if, you start typing, it'll kind of give you suggestions and everything, right? But we're not going to be doing a division here, so we don't really, I'm just going to click this for that part. So we got that. But here we want to actually multiply, right? So we're going to multiply this by the miles. So it's suggesting this. You can hit the tab key, right? Because it knew that miles was there that you already had it defined, right? This is the one, if this passes, if it successfully parses this, it's going to populate this miles variable, right, with whatever you put on the screen, and then you use it here, right? So let's see how we look. So, okay, so we did that, and then what we're going to want to do is we're going to do label result. Remember that one? And actually, I want to do a little bit of this, but we do want to do that dot text, but we don't want to do all this stuff. So I'm going to do dot text, and then we want this equal to, so we're going to do interpolation here, right? So we're going to use a $sign, so we can put variables right in our string. So we're going to use a $sign here. And then we're going to do that. And then we're going to put in curly braces, miles. All right. And then after that, we're going to put miles is, so miles is kilometers. So those will put in, like, if we put in 30 miles, 30 miles is, and then we'll put in another curly, and we're going to put in kilometers here, K-I-L. We can just hit OK here. Well, or we click on it, kilometers. And then we want to print that out as well, right? Kilometers. So there you go. The bad thing about me making this stuff so big, okay? So that's that. So what's missing here? This has got a little red squiggly. Do you know what's missing here? You have to have a semicolon at the end, right? No, and then all of a sudden down here, no issues found, right? So down here, so that's if. So if it parses it successfully, we're going to do this, this calculation, this conversion, right? And then we're going to populate our label result, okay, with this message, right? Now, if it doesn't, maybe we want to display some kind of an error to the user, okay? So here, what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to do our label result again. So we're doing label result, and then we're going to go ahead and do .text here. And we want to set that equal to, please enter a valid number. All right. And then little squiggly line, because what we forgot, what we still have to do is put a semicolon. Right? So always semicolons when you're doing anything with a variable or this or that. Different for if statements, if else, right? So basically this is going to try to parse it. If it does, it's going to go ahead and do this conversion, and it's going to populate the label text, else it's going to give us this. So let's go ahead and save this. Or we go up here, File, Save All. Okay. Good news, it says no issues found. So at least this should run at the minimum. I think we're going to have to do a little bit of changes on our label up here, but right here. But we're going to have to make it bigger. distance in miles. So if I had entered 20 and hit convert to kilometers, no, it did. It took care of it. 20 miles is 32 kilometers. So there you go. Okay. It's all good. All right. So you can either close it by clicking that. You can close it by clicking up here. All right. Okay. So that was with that one. So let's go back to our designer screen, and we still have convert to miles. Right. And this one here, so like this one, if you recall, we had our events here. And here's our on-click event for that one, right? For here, you know, I know I had a little issue there. I don't know what was all going on there. We don't have an on-click event. This one, we need an on-click event, okay? So now we've got that. I don't know what was going on before, but now it's working fine. Okay, so we got button convert to miles. So what we're going to do here is probably pretty much a similar thing here. You know, we can kind of maybe do a little cut and pasting. Why not? So let's just grab this. Paste that in here. We're just going to change a few things. All right. So here we're going to have kilometers. All right. So we're going to try to, we're going to parse the field's going to change. This is probably the biggest thing you got to be careful about, right? So here we've got our text, what we call this, kilometers. It's not going to show me what it was. That's not nice. I have to go back here and look at that one. Here, actually. So we had text. Let me just do it this way. Safer. So here we have this one. So what do we call this one? Oh, one thing just out of habit, I had, once you kind of select something, it kind of stays, right? So I had events high. We need properties. These are the two things down here that are really going to be important, properties and events. So if I click on properties, here is this one here, right? And then we have a name, right? So this is the name we actually want. So I'm going to go back here to my form, which, you know, different ways to get here, but you can always go right click and then view code. So we're back here to our form. So this is our field. So we want to do text.get distance in kilometers. And then here we want to do this differently, right? So here, so we have kilometers over here now. So we want to do double miles. We'll create a new variable called miles, because our miles variable we had up here, okay? We had this miles variable here that we used here, okay? It's only the visibility is only within this if statement, okay? It's only within this if, okay? Once you're outside of this, this doesn't know what's going on in here, okay? So you've got to create here we're creating a variable called miles, right? And then in here we're going to be doing the kilometers, right? So we're going to do kilometers, and we're going to do that, and we're going to divide that by our thing we did up top there, kilometers per mile, right? That's what we have up here top, kilometers per mile. So we're going to divide that. And then here we need to change this a little bit. So basically, this is going to be kilometers is miles. Okay. So let's see how that looks. Let me get rid of this. All right. So now we're making sure we get this from our kilometers text box, one distance in kilometers, And then if it's valid, it's going to go ahead and put that, create that variable is going to be used. It's going to populate that variable with whatever we had in our text field. We're going to do that, and we're going to divide that by kilometers per mile and put this in miles. And then we are going to put our variables right in here. So this will be whatever we put in here. Let's say I'll put number 5. 5 kilometers is, and how many miles that this would be, you know, in that calculation. Otherwise, we'll do the same thing here. All right. I'm going to do no issues found. That's always a good thing there. File save as, save all. I don't know why I save as. File save all. Now if I go ahead and click this, and we're going to test this one. So I'm going to put in 5, convert to miles, and so 5 kilometers is 3.125 miles. Okay. Now if I entered something otherwise, something that wouldn't parse, right? Please enter a valid number. Okay. Let's get this back to a valid number. So here, just want to put some bad data in there, make sure that works. Please enter a valid thing. So another thing that's always kind of good on screens, you don't have to, it's really not a requirement on this one, but you know, to have kind of an exit button, you can always click this, but it's nice, very convenient for users to just have, you know, a quit or exit button that you can click. Also, resets button's really nice. I would reset everything on this, right? So that would be nice. But so there you have that. What we probably could also do, just real quick here, let me bring this up one more time. So this is going to say label 3. If we run this thing, it'll say label 3 there. Yeah, we don't really want that, do we? So what you can kind of do, the bad thing is you kind of won't see it when you do it, but like, so I'm going to highlight this. And then we're going to come down here to text label 3. And we're just going to get rid of that. Okay. So that's gone. It'll just be like that then. Okay. There's other solutions, save all. But at least now, if you bring this up, well, yep, you won't see anything there, right? Just, you know, looks a little nicer. And now it'll do that. Okay. So that's it. You know, you can basically take this and commit this to GitHub, and this would, you know, this will be the first lab assignment. Sorry, I kind of had some problems today. I don't know why. I was having problems before now, just in general for today for some reason. But okay, and let's look at the lab again real quick here. Let's kind of review that. What do I have? I might have to pull that again. What did I do with that one? All right. So that was this first one. If you go ahead and kind of follow along with the video, you should be fine on that. This one here, I'm going to let you kind of work on this. It is a little bit of a challenge though. Here you're going to, and maybe I'll put a couple hints when I'll send the update video, update email, and kind of give you a couple hints. Here you kind of use modulus, right? So 10 dozen, right? So how do you figure out how many dozen? There's a couple different ways. Modulus is the easiest way, right? You can, however many numbers you add, you put all these numbers in it. It's going to add up to one number, 127 eggs, maybe, like in this case. I don't know if adding this up is right, but 127 eggs. So how do you determine how many dozen that is? Divided by 12. What's the result of dividing by 12 is how many dozens it's going to be. How many's left over, right? Left over is always going to be that modulus, right? So if you're dividing, you know, if you do it modulus with that, you know, what's the remainder going to be, right? So that's your remainder. So little tip on that one, okay? As far as this one here, what I'm going to go ahead and do for you is I'll just go ahead and create a separate video on creating the screen, what's needed to create this, and then you're going to work on the code that's behind the screen, right? You're going to work on the code. So basically, when you click calculate button, right, it's going to create one of those events, and then you're going to do everything in that to, you know, to do all the calculations to populate this, right? Okay. So one thing I want to go through here. So you know how we click the buttons to create those events. Sometimes it's just easy to accidentally do things. So like here, if I double click on this distance by miles, it's automatically going to create an event for that, like it did right there. And one thing you just want to be careful about, you know, because sometimes you get a bunch of them in here and you just kind of want to clean it up and stuff, right? So, so one thing you kind of have to do in here, you can't just, once you do that, you cannot just say, I'm going to delete that, all right? You would think you'd be okay, but let me show you what's going to happen here. If you save this, you don't even have to save it. Now, if I run this, it's going to say no issues found here. It's fine, but this is going to be a problem. And let me show you. See, there are build errors, right? And that's because you deleted that, right? But if we go back to our designer, well, and this is going to be complaining here too as well. See, I don't, that can really make things difficult. So I guess I'll show you how to do it, which I don't like you messing with this file to fix this, okay? I'll show you how to fix this. But the whole thing is to kind of probably, if you do that by accident, we'll show you a different way. So here, let me fix this now, and then we'll go. I'll show you a different way if it happens again. Then how to. Okay, so here, where were we here? Let's go to code. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of this. Maybe this is what caused my other problem before. I wouldn't doubt it. Okay, now we did that. So I'm going to save this. Okay, I don't think, let me close that. Maybe I will still have a problem. Maybe that's what caused my problem earlier when I was having so much problem. View designer, okay, well, so, but what happens is, well, remember when we clicked on this, we had an event over here. So I click on this, come over here. So once again, this is just practice, and you'll figure these things out. These are properties, and this is our events, right? Events is when you do something. So here, no, I don't know why it's. Because I guess I got rid of it from there. So, but that's really not the best way. Everything worked, and I actually deleted that, and it did delete it from here. Okay, but let me show you one more time here. I'm probably confusing the heck out of you. So if you come in here, sometime you accidentally click something, you got it here. The way you want to kind of get rid of this, the best way to get rid of this is go back in here. All right. And right click on this and hit reset. Okay, and when you hit reset, it'll get rid of it. Okay. That way you don't have to mess with these files, because those other files are files that you got to be careful with those. Some are generated, right? You really shouldn't be editing them. And in this case, kind of got stuck having to do something with it. All right. When I clicked the code, it had the error, click the code. It's opening up the other file, right? And so, all right. So just kind of a gotcha there on that. Let me know if you have a problem with that. Just remember, because you're going to accidentally do that. I've done that many times. Accidentally, you just click on something. All you got to do is double click on something that you don't want to have an event for, and it's going to end up creating an event. So the other thing I just kind of want to reiterate, so as far as your assignments are concerned, what I would do from my perspective, please, make sure you work on your hands-on test first, okay? Here, either do the written test or the labs, that's up to you. It might help you to do a little bit of the written test. And obviously you do have those guides that I think are helpful. You may feel different, these different guides, and they're going to be both in the syllabus. So if you look at the syllabus, you'll see links to those guides, and I'll also put it in the description on the videos as well. Okay. But that's up to you on that. But then, you need to do chapter 4 labs. I worry about this Maui lab first. I wouldn't do anything with this Maui lab till the end. Let me know if you have some problems with that, okay? And we'll talk about that. Don't panic if something goes wrong here. But try to work with this if you get there, and we'll go from there on that. Okay. So that's all I have for today. I will get this video out as soon as possible. Thanks, and have a great day.